Well, welcome again, and thank you for attending. My name is Lisa, and I'm a member of the study team. This is the second public meeting for the Vekol and Smith Wash's Watershed Plan Environmental Assessments. There may be some glitches, so please bear with us. We'll try to avoid any technical difficulties and help aid with any technical difficulties you may have. To request any accommodations related to this meeting or materials, you can contact Chris Wanamaker at 520-866-6010 or at Christopher Wanamaker at pinal.gov, and that's CHRISTOPHER.WANAMAKER at pinal.gov. This information will also be on the screen later in the presentation and posted in the chat. During today's meeting, members of the study team will be providing an update on the study and the preliminary alternatives. Following the presentation, they will answer any questions. The meeting is scheduled to end at 6:30, but the study team will stay online to answer questions after 6:30 if needed. For today's meeting, we're using Zoom, or attendees can call in. Please keep your phones or computer audio on mute throughout the meeting. Attendees will be muted and video turned off. If you have any questions or comments, please enter them into the chat window in Zoom. The chat feature can be accessed in the menu settings. Comments or questions can be entered during the presentation or when we get to the question and answer session. You can also add your email address at any time to the chat feature to be added to the study mailing list for study news and updates. You may also submit any questions, comments, or sign up to join the study's mailing list after the meeting through an online survey via email or phone. More information on this will be provided during the presentation and posted in the chat for anyone who may need to leave early. Today's meeting will be recorded and posted on the Flood Control District's webpage. You can also find the project fact sheet and online comment forms on the webpage at www.pinal.countyaz.gov/publicworks/flood control. I'm now going to turn it over to Christopher Wanamaker, County Engineer with Pinal County, to begin our presentation. Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for joining for this second public meeting for the Vekol and Smith Wash Watershed Plan and Environmental Assessments. We're hoping to get through a lot of discussions today about the alternatives that we're proposing for the watershed, and to get some feedback from everybody. And just so you know, on the county's project website, we did post some surveys that people can take, where we will ask you some questions about your, about the alternatives and about your willingness to, like let us on your land, for example, to implement a project, whether, whatever the alternative is that we end up showing you. So there'll be more about that later in the presentation. And I guess with that, we'll hand it over to Reynold, our consultant with Holistic Engineering and Land Management, who will take us through the presentation.
Thank you, Chris. Just to kind of let everyone know, this is the second public meeting in our series of 3 for this project. The first public meeting we held approximately about a year ago, asking the public to identify flooding issues and other types of resource concerns they may have for the area. We have since collected that data, and we have produced preliminary alternatives for which to present to you, the public. So with that, I'll begin my presentation. Let's see. There we go. The project team. As Chris had mentioned, Chris Wanamaker is the county engineer He also represents Pinal County, which is the sponsoring local organization, or the SLO, according to this type of process we're using, which is done by NRCS, the Natural Resource and Conservation Service. Forgive me if I got that wrong. Next, our representative from NRCS, who is our agency partner, is Dave Bayman. He is the state conservation engineer. The consultant team that the county has hired is, consists of myself, Ronald Kraft. I'm the project manager for the team, which, and I work for Holistic Engineering Land Management. Our landscape architect, John Griffin, is from Environmental Planning Group. They'll largely be addressing a lot of the environmental aspects of the project that are required as part of the NRCS program. Lisa, who started this, she's our public involvement coordinator. She's with WSP. And finally, Barbara Wise, she is our economist. So she'll be making sure that anything that we propose will be satisfactory to obtain federal funding. A little bit of background on this project area. This project was initiated as a result of a storm that occurred in the area back in 2018. This was largely remnants of Hurricane Rosa that crept up from the Pacific and up, like up the California coast and into Arizona. There was extensive flooding throughout the area. Homes and streets were flooded, as you can see in the pictures on the screen. There was significant canal damage to the primary canal that feeds the auction community as well as the farmers in the area. They did there was approximately about $1 million worth of repairs they had to do to it. Just in general, the drainage system in the area is complex, to say the least. A lot of it is been put together by landowners over the years, over the past century, that this area has been settled. So a lot of the infrastructure may be undersized for what it's receiving. And in general, it's just kind of discontinuous, just because there's been no overall plan to help kind of address how flow gets through the area. And it's been severely prone to a lot of failures due to just lack of maintenance, because there is no overarching public agency that manages the system. It's largely left up to the landowners to ensure that the system stays in place and functions as it does. And another big reason for why this study was initiated, there's been no regional level studies. There's been many studies throughout the area. There's been development and other aspects that the counties needed in there. But looking at the watershed in totality, that has not been done to this level to date. Specifically, what we refer to this project, and this is NRCS's language, it's a watershed plan / environmental assessment, a plan EA. And basically, this is a federal document that gets produced in order to achieve federal funding for various projects in rural areas related to flooding, needs for farming, and other associated items. If it's like watershed degradation, there's provisions for that to help kind of rebuild the watershed. I just wanted to make a point that if you've noticed on the title, we kind of say Vekol Wash and Smith Wash Plan EAs. The NRCS program does have a size limit of 250,000 acres per study. So we had to divide this into 2 studies, but they are being performed concurrently. Just so it's, even though they're going to be 2 separate documents, this is the same study and everything is going to be on the same timeline. A big component of the Plan EA is the purpose and need. This basically is the driver for how we get our, for what we obtain in terms of resources, at least available resources, in terms to determine what are the concerns and how to address those concerns. So for this particular study, we are proposing to mitigate flooding, especially flooding related to agricultural operations, residents throughout the area, and mobility. There isn't that many roads out there, and it's mostly dip crossings. So when it floods, people could be trapped out there. So it's, as part of the study, we hope to address these flooding concerns. The goal in general is substantial reduction for larger storms. Typically in our industry, refer to this as the 100-year, which is actually translates into a storm that has a 1% chance a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. That being said, based on climate change and just kind of for what we've kind of been seeing in the area over the past 10, 20 years, these larger storms have actually become more frequent. Well, I'll take that back. They become more common, but the storms in general become less frequent. So like last year, we did not see any rain. This year we're seeing rain again, but the storms we do get tend to be considerably larger than we otherwise did 20, 30, 40 years ago. But at a minimum, we want effective protection against smaller storms, which is basically storms that occur at 10% of the time, about most storms. They call it a 10-year storm, but it has a 10% chance of occurring in a given year, which should be most storms. Just to go a little bit over the NRCS process for those who did not attend the last meeting. Our first public meeting largely centered on this concept we call scoping and affected environment, which was part of our data collection effort to obtain all the data resources that we know of in the area in order to formulate our alternatives. And we had a public, as I mentioned before, we had a public meeting approximately about a year ago. We are now at the alternative formulation evaluation stage, where we're determining feasibility. We're starting to look at the cost to construct it versus the benefit of any improvements that we provide. We look at the environmental consequences of these improvements. The last thing we want to do is create an improvement that could degrade the environment in some fashion. We want to at least try to mitigate any impacts that we may have on any environmental resources, while at the same time trying to see if we can help, promote some resources that may be deficient. And of course, the public stakeholder involvement, which we're doing right now. During this time, we actually are required to do consultation. NRCS carries this out. They're by law. So when you talk like with the tribe, with the auction or GRIC, since one is within the study area, the other is adjacent to the study area, we need to address their concerns related to cultural matters. Looking at federal agencies, we're looking at Fish and Wildlife to ensure we're not impacting any protected species. And we talked to the Corps because they actually facilitate the Clean Water Act. So anything that we do in line with any of the washes in the area, we have to ensure that we're not creating any environmental impacts to that may affect homeowners or landowners or anyone else within the watershed. And finally, we create the document, which is the Watershed Plan Environmental Assessment. And there is a stated format. We will first develop a preliminary version, which will be reviewed by stakeholders, local agencies, and the state, at the state level. This will basically create the draft. And this is where we will come back for a third public meeting to present it back to you, the public, for review and comment. And during that time, we will incorporate all comments into the document and then finalize. Progress to date. We have essentially completed our data collection process, at least the bulk of it. We are still open to collecting data, other aspects. If there's anyone on this call that actually has flooding concerns they would like to let us know about, we're still open to collecting data like that. We've engaged bulk of the major stakeholders within the area just to kind of get what their needs and wants are as part of the improvements to ensure that we're not impacting significantly anyone in the watershed that economically, we don't want to impact anyone economically, as well as just being able to live in the area. And then now we're in the middle of preliminary alternative development. So we solicited input from the stakeholders. Now we're soliciting it from you, the public, about what your thoughts, concerns are on our alternatives, which I'll present later. And we've begun starting to quantify the benefits, which will help kind of define what we can construct and what we could get federal funding for. It's kind of a backstop for us to kind of help guide us to basically say we can't just put in big concrete channels everywhere because they would be very expensive. So we have to focus on solutions that are effective, at least to addressing flooding, but also cost effective in order to achieve the funding requirements as part of this program. I don't know if I have anyone from NRCS on who would like to mention anything. Dave Bayman, are you on at all? Do we allow him to? I thought I saw him. If you can, just put something in the chat and I'll.
Reynold, I'm here.
Oh, okay, thanks, Dave.
Yeah, no worries. I couldn't unmute until someone gave me permission to do so. So thank you.
Sorry about that, Dave.
No worries. Again, I just want to thank Pinal County, Chris, and also want to thank Helm, Reynold, and your team for your leadership in this endeavor. We see a lot of value in this collaborative effort in seeking out input and feedback from the local community and our understanding of the watershed, what the issues might be in the watershed, and the topic today, what can we do about those concerns? So I appreciate everyone's participation this evening and look forward to the further conversation and discussion. Thank you, Reynold.
Dave. Thanks. Chris, do you have any other, like anything else you want to add before I dive more into the presentation?
No, I think let's just get into it. Thank you.
All right. Will do. All right. So I'm going to kind of go over what we have done. I'm going to highlight some of the items that I, to you of what concerns that we found in the area and how we're gearing a lot of our alternatives and solutions towards addressing. So I'll start off with data collection. Data collection basically creates the context for our alternative development. So we collected things such as, geological and soils data. We did I call hydrology to hydraulics. So basically it's a flood model. So I can model how water flows through the watershed. And I'll show you that in a following slide with some of the high level results to kind of see how how it kind of patterns through the area. We got data on wildlife and vegetation to make sure we're not impacting it, maybe find ways to help promote more wildlife and vegetation in the area. Cultural resources with the local tribes in the area. This is a major concern for us. Social demographics. We have to follow environmental justice laws to ensure that we're not adversely impacting underserved communities within the watershed. We have to focus, we have to get data on land use and ownership, and that's largely trying to see who owns what. Not necessarily private owners, but mostly on potential stakeholders like land management, the tribes, Arizona State Land Department, as a few minor ones like Bureau of Reclamation, just to name a few. Agriculture, obviously there's a lot of farmland out here, so that was a bit of an effort to kind of try to collect a lot of data about crop yields and what could be impacted by storm flows throughout the area. And groundwater. Groundwater is definitely the one common resource that has been in the area that's been going on for probably about 100 years. So if with the drought contingency plan, if the water gets cut off from the CAP canal and into the area, that's groundwater becomes one of those that we need to ensure that we're not going to be adversely impacting, maybe and try to find ways to help kind of promote more groundwater recharge. So one of the highlights I wanted to make is what we kind of collected through our geology and soils data is the area, because it's been farmed for about 100 years now, probably over 100, well over 100 years. It relied heavily on groundwater for up until like the 70s. And this has created significant subsidence in the area. So for those of you who may be familiar with the area, if you're looking at 347 coming south out of Maricopa, where it connects in with 84 before it goes into I-8, down here, you're over the past 100 years, that area has dropped close to 12 feet over like 1900 when these readings were first taken. And because of that significant drop that you see here, this has resulted in what you see, as I denoted by the red lines here, as fissures. So it's basically the ground is breaking because it hits a hard rock shelf like this, and the earth basically just cracks and opens up. This causes a lot of damage to roads and other infrastructure. This is a concern for us because it basically, we cannot put in anything that's hardened or anything that could break that might fail in some way and essentially cause unattended flooding to adjacent landowners. This is the flood model that I talked about earlier. So basically you could kind of see the lighter blue is, we're talking about like less than half a foot. Actually, the light blue is probably more like a quarter foot. So any residents that kind of live above the canal that I'm showing along here, you probably see flow just not really accumulating, but just kind of flowing through the area like in a wide, in a very dispersed method. It isn't until it hits the canal till it starts to pond up behind it, and that's where you kind of see these darker magenta areas. Those are the deeper areas. We're talking, that's more like 6-7 feet of depth at those locations. And then here you kind of see overtopping that kind of gets into the farm fields, and we've talked to several of the larger farmers in the area, and they do agree that this does happen during larger events. We did some testing, just some sensitivity testing with the model to see what happens if we were to address everything along the canal. And basically it clears up everything in the farm fields. So this is very encouraging to us, and actually suggests to us we need to keep our improvements above the farm fields, because basically the farmland could take care of the rain that falls on it, even in a 100-year event. And finally, I just want to kind of show, this is what I got from ADWR, Arizona Department of Water Resources, kind of showing 1900 here. This is what the water levels are. They're about 50 feet below the surface. It gets down to about the lowest readings in 76, where you're looking at, instead of being 50 feet below, it gets about 250, 300 feet below ground level. But since the addition of the canal, a lot of that has come back. And so a lot of the area has has recovered just because of the water brought in from the CAP, from the Colorado. Now, if farmers have to go back on using groundwater again, we could start seeing this. So we, as part of our improvements, we want to try to help capture as much stormwater as we can and infiltrate it to ensure we stabilize this and we don't produce additional fissures in the area that could impact roads, canals, and the improvements that we are recommending. Before I jump into the improvements themselves or the alternatives that I'm going to be talking about, we broke the project up into project areas, and this will lead into what we need from you, because we want to know, one, where you live and where you know what needs to go where in these particular project areas. These are basically areas that were delineated because we can independently implement solutions without it affecting the adjacent project area. So this gives the county the ability to improve them one at a time based on available funding resources, as well as being able to get funding, like federal funding, to help. So when we apply the alternatives, we're looking at these project areas individually. So if we do, say, for channels, if we apply channels to one project area, it doesn't mean we're going to be doing it to the next project area. It just means that we're just applying channels just to this one project area, and then maybe a basin that captures water will be fine in the next project area. But in general, we divided up. The Vekol Wash area has 5 project areas. As you can see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 basically encompasses Vekol Wash itself. Smith Wash is a little bit more dispersed as it starts to kind of feed into Smith Wash, which kind of rides along the outer boundary of this red line into the Auction community, but largely is centered around the canal itself. And we broke that up to about 6 separate areas that are independent from each other. we looked at 10 alternative concepts throughout the area. We were able to get rid of the last 5 because we determined they were infeasible or incredibly difficult to implement at a effective level, or they were just way too expensive. But the first 5 alternatives, which I'll be presenting, is number 1, we'll be looking at dams and impoundments. Number 2, channels. 3, basins to basically capture flow, store it. 4, decentralized flood control. I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit more later. And floodwater allocation, where we actually use the farm fields themselves as ability to dispose of floodwater. So alternative 1, dams and impoundments. Basically, a lot of these will be placed at the base of mountains, or at the mountains along the western boundary of Pinal County. And they are basically designed to take those mountain flows and bring them down to a smaller flow enough to be able to use the terrain itself downstream to basically infiltrate. So we're just trying to take that flood wave that's built up on the mountain and being able to reduce it down to something that's manageable and something that could be easily just conveyed in just natural corridors through a lot of property, like a lot of residential property in the area. So just to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like, that's a lot of what these little green lines are basically just capturing and metering or outflow. Some of them are further down because it gets a little too dispersed off the mountains. But if you get down here to Smith Wash, you'll see that we've kind of chosen some select streams along here to kind of help slow the water down, so you don't get this flood wave that blasts off the mountain and through this area, because you start to lose a lot of conveyance in some of these natural washes. And then we put something along the canal to kind of be able to collect it and kind of protect the canal. Go back. Regional channels. This is basically just taking flow from concentrated locations, similar locations to where we place those dams and impoundments, and being able to just move them through the area to a downstream discharge point. So that kind of looks like, as you kind of see here, it kind of follows along the road, the existing roadway corridors, and takes it to existing facilities that were constructed years ago, and kind of connects up to the system. ADOT along 347 has an existing channel that we would literally just tie into, and that would just continue down and just kind of flow out through the area. The downside of the channels is they don't really adjust flooding down within the upstream community as much as it might help people in the upper watershed. So it may increase issues down here, so that channels may not be feasible for several of the project areas that push water or make it worse for the tribal communities.
Hey, Reynold.
Yeah.
Hey, yeah, so just to elaborate on that, the channels may not be feasible by themselves, because we may have to add other components to mitigate that downstream. So I don't want people to think that we may not be able to do channels at all, but by themselves they may not be feasible. But so just
thank you, Chris. That's kind of the point. why it still is an alternative is because it doesn't mean that they're infeasible, but they can be tied in with other improvements that we do, because we still need to move water through the area in some fashion. So it's channels still are what we would consider feasible, and why we still consider them. Regional basins. This is where we would combine them with the channels to reduce those flows, and they could be both what we call detention, which is you just take a larger flow and turn it into a smaller flow. So you just detain the flow for a short period of time, or you can retain, which means you hold the water there without releasing it. The only way you get rid of that is through water, and retention is through infiltration. So if we go back to our map here, we see I have the regional channels now, but now I have these little purple boxes on them. These will help kind of regulate the flow, so we don't have to put in large channels. We can basically just, instead of having just one massive flow that you have to design a channel for, we could take that flow and smooth it out and just have a consistent baseline flow to which to drain out the area. If you're looking down in the Smith Wash area, you can use the canal as kind of a backstop, and you can put in, and you can design your basins to be more retention, which, as I mentioned before, with groundwater recharge, these basins would be right at the top of where the farmers would start pumping groundwater. So these would become like an ideal location to start that process. And the only downstream channels we would be placing there is for like emergency overflows, to ensure that the channel, or the canal does not get damaged. If there is an emergency situation, like we could just get like a 200 or 300 or 500 year storm, which can be very possible these days. We want to be able to protect the existing infrastructure. So downstream, we want to still maintain channels, our channel network, to ensure water can still move through without damaging people's homes and livelihoods. Alternative 4, decentralized flood control. This is something that's, I would say it's something old that's being made new again, and is being promoted in a lot of what we call like conservation type work, where we call it green infrastructure. Other terms that we call low impact development, but low impact development typically refers to urbanized areas where you see a very large increase in impervious areas like parking lots, roads, and other things that may produce additional runoff. And in this case, it's a very rural area, but we apply the same kind of conservation methods using what we call green infrastructure. A lot of this is basically trying to use the environment to your advantage. So for example, you can use check dams in washes. Check dams kind of have a dual kind of benefit with them, actually a triple benefit, as they kind of help slow the water down, especially in smaller storm events. But what they do is they capture small amounts of water as well as sediment, and they kind of help kind of flatten out the channel. But that small amount of water that's captured actually promotes vegetation. And there's been a lot of degradation in the watershed due to combined increased storm events as well as human activity in the area, which is, we've seen lost vegetation. Lost vegetation increases sediment. Increased sediment loads creates maintenance issues and downstream flooding, as well as covering up roads, gets, moves, washes, into different properties. So this kind of helps try to promote some of those natural processes by trying to capture small amounts of water sediment over a wide area. So one or two of these is not going to solve your flooding issue. We're talking about hundreds of these that would have to be throughout the area. And likely we would have to include a lot of these on private property, which is a question that we'll be asking later about this type of solution. But the benefits of it is you basically get to maintain the environment as a natural condition. Now, one of the other things I'm showing on this on the slide here is key line plowing. This is an Australian farming method that people in arid areas are starting to use here in the US. These pictures are actually from West Texas, which probably rains even less than the Vekol Smith watershed. But what it does is it almost doubles your infiltration for a brief period of time. Obviously, they're just cuts in the earth that that just kind of fill up with sediment water over time, and eventually you have to come out and do this again. But it does promote vegetation, which does help hold all that sediment down, and actually help kind of cool down the area. The more vegetation, the more ambient temperature gets dropped, the less potential for severe storms from higher temperatures. So there's this whole ecological benefit that you can just by promoting additional vegetation throughout the area. Going back to our map, you kind of see here, we would be in the yellow. This is where we would be applying a lot of the check dams. And these check dams, they're no more than like about 1 foot to 2 feet high. We're not talking anything large. We're just talking about something that is just incremental and can be done over time. I purposely excluded the farmland because, as I showed in the previous slide with the flooding, the farmland basically is its own green infrastructure, and it infiltrates everything that falls on it. So farmland is basically perfect for this type of activity. The purple areas where we would look at more like enhanced infiltration techniques, such as that keyline plowing that I showed. And finally, alternative 5 is the floodwater allocation. So as I mentioned before, we're using the farm fields themselves as the method to get rid of flow from these channels, or from from whatever impacts the area. So we would allocate so much of a particular flow for these farmers to take as part of this process. The downside is it needs to be kind of all implemented together. Otherwise, there's a potential that a farmer could receive more flow than the other farmer. So its rollout would have to be very strategic. And just as a pointer, I just wanted to bring up, we're not showing anything within the auction community because currently the county does not have the authority to maintain or construct within the auction Indian community. So based on the program, the NRCS program, we would unlikely be able to get federal funding So at this time, we are talking with the auction about trying to address that concern right now. But currently, we only propose alternatives that the county can actually construct and maintain. So what we need from you. So as I mentioned, before, we want you to locate your project area, and you can apply, and you can respond to all the project areas if you want. When Lisa comes back on, she'll walk you through the survey, and you'll be able to either just answer just one or all of the project areas that you desire as part of that survey. We'll be looking for alternative preference. So those 5 alternatives, we would like to know what you would like to see out there. Different people have different concerns. So we're going to try to see if we can, address, as many concerns as we can with our improvements. This will also allow us to make adjustments to our alternatives to better accommodate what the public, would like to see. One of the questions we'll ask is the willingness to allow the county onto your property. This is kind of key, going back to that decentralized approach, because if we install check dams on your property, the county would like to inspect that to ensure that it's conforming the way that it's supposed to. One of the final steps in the NRCS process is to evaluate what we've done, and we need to verify that what we've placed is working to our satisfaction, or to everyone's satisfaction. And then finally, for anyone who didn't provide any comments before about flooding concerns, this is another opportunity to provide any comments on flooding or any other resource concerns in the area. Next steps moving forward is we're gonna select the preferred alternative, hopefully later this summer, and produce a preliminary Plan EA at roughly the same time. And we hope to, by the fall, have a draft Plan EA that may get pushed, but we're going to try to shoot for this to present to you what the document is, and for you to make comments at that time, and then hopefully have a approved final Plan EA by early next year. As Lisa mentioned before, this is Chris Wanamaker's contact information. Everything will flow through him. He will take all comments either by phone, email, or you could just fill out the surveys that should be posted online. Any comments or questions at this time? I'll leave it up to Chris or Lisa if you have any closing comments that you would like to make.
Hey, Reynold, this is Chris. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I think 2 things. I think one, we should probably go to the ClearGov website, which is the project website, and actually show people where the survey is. So if you could do that. And then the second thing, I think most people, at least based on the calls that I've received so far, most people are interested in, where their property is in relation to these alternatives. And so, yeah, there's surveys right there. If you scroll down a little bit further, we just posted the 2 links there. So I think some people are gonna wonder, how do I figure out where my property is in relation to these project areas? So we do have maps posted on here, and it still may be difficult. So if you want help figuring out where your property is in relation to the 2 studies or the project areas, you can just call me or email me, and I can figure that out for you if it's because it can be quite confusing. It's a large area, so I'll go ahead and offer that up. So, but yeah, other than that, I think we could just open it up for questions. We have a total of 25 people on the call, so that's great. So, and I think we have some people on the phone who are not able to use the chat. I don't know, Lisa, if there's a way, if the phone call, is there a way for them to raise their hand or ask a question? I'm not sure.
Yep, you should be able on the phone to use the raise your hand function. So if you raise your hand, we can ask you to unmute, and then you can share your question with the project team. So, but one of the questions that we have been getting is, in general, how will this affect my property?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so, we talk a little bit about that. So, in general, what we're talking about is mitigating flooding. And so there should be overall a positive benefit to properties that we're trying to achieve. Now, there's going to be some properties that, as you probably saw on the maps, that we're going to need to acquire easements or right of way from. Now, of course, we want to work with the community and with landowners to find these solutions. So, we don't really want to go through an eminent domain process, because if we're taking your land, then how are we helping you? That doesn't make any sense. So we want to work with the community and find solutions. So the alternatives you see here in terms of the channel layouts and the basin locations, these are still high level, conceptual, and not necessarily exact. And they can be changed or shifted. And then another aspect of that question is that I've received is, how about taxes? Is this going to affect my taxes? And the answer is no. There's no discussion or even proposal to raise taxes to pay for this. In fact, we're going to use our existing flood control budget and the federal dollars that we have received so far and will be applying for in the future to fund these improvements. So there's no discussion or proposal to raise taxes at all for this. And then another aspect of that question, how it affects me, is about floodplain mapping. Is this going to put me in a floodplain? Am I going to have to disclose that and pay for flood insurance? And the answer is no. This study is not a floodplain mapping study. There's no floodplain map revisions or anything as part of that, and this is not going to change any of the floodplains, except maybe long term after we implement a solution. We may go back and remove a floodplain and put it in the channel or whatever we build, but that's a long-term thing. But this project is not intended or will not revise floodplains. So it's kind of a general question, so there's a range of answers. So, but I'll be happy to answer any other questions that we may have.
Yep, we received another one. It appears like new development is moving south of Maricopa. How will this plan affect city growth?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we are aware of several large developments south of the city, and I've been working with all of those, in that area, and and they're all at various stages, and we want to make sure that the drainage solutions that the developers implement, which they're required to do, all development is required to deal with their own drainage. We want to make sure that it complements what is being proposed in this plan. Now, the challenge is this plan is still very conceptual and high level. So we work with those developers to make sure that we can implement solutions together that are mutually beneficial. Now, there are also some potential developments that we are potentially going to partner with and get a win-win solution where, we implement a channel, for example, and they help pay for it, and it also counts towards their required infrastructure, to put it simply. So we are working with all the developers. They are aware of these this study, this plan that's being done, and we're making sure that that when they're planning their site layout for their subdivisions and the commercial sites, that they are looking at this plan and making sure that everything's accommodated as much as possible with the information we have at this time.
We've got another question. I live in Thunderbird Farms. Are we also talking about building a bridge over the wash on Ralston?
Yeah, so that is a separate project, not related to this. In fact, we are this fiscal year doing design work, and I believe the 5-year plan, let me grab it here. I think the bridge is scheduled for, if I can't find it real quick, I think it's 2 years from now, scheduled for construction. So yeah, I can't find it right now through this plan, but I believe it's 2 years from now for construction, and this current year is design, and that is separate from this project that we're talking about today, and funded through transportation funds. So it's completely separate, but that is being worked on.
Great. We have no more questions at this time. We did get a comment. Thank you very much from the community in Thunderbird Farms. So thank you for that comment. So the project team will stay online for, oh, we did get another comment. How long will it take this plan to finish?
So I think Reynold had a rough schedule there on his presentation. I think it was, I can't remember what he said in there, but it was, we'll just go back to the slide there. Yeah, early 2022. And that's just to finish this plan and this study. Now, when we talk about actually implementing any of these solutions, or rather the preferred alternative, that could still take several years. And what we're probably looking at is at least 5 years from now before we actually will implement anything, unless it's a cheap solution. By cheap, I mean inexpensive, or perhaps a solution that we can partner with other agencies like the channe, or perhaps a land developer partnership. Maybe it could happen earlier, but at least 5 years, most likely, for implementing any solution because of funding. But yeah, this plan will be hopefully done early in 2022.
Thanks, Chris. If anybody has any more questions, feel free to type them in the chat. Also posted in the chat is a link to the project website, as well as a link to both the Vekol Wash and Smith Wash survey, as well as Chris's contact information. So if you would like to reach him for help at looking at the map or for any materials, his phone number and email is posted. So also with the comment form, as Reynold mentioned, you'll be able to comment not only on the project area that you reside in, but all of the project areas. So if you continue to follow it through, and it'll ask if you'd like to continue to comment on the different project areas, you can hit yes and go to the project area you'd like to comment on. One note with the survey, if you do want to go backwards or forwards, there's previous and advanced buttons and next buttons at the bottom. Those are the best ones to use to go back and forth in the survey as you provide your comments, versus hitting the back button up on the top of your browser. So we've got no more questions coming in, so we'll wait another minute or so just to see if anything comes in. But otherwise, I'd like to thank everybody for attending tonight's meeting and all of your comments and questions. We very much appreciate it, and I encourage you to check out the website and complete a comment form. Thank you.